First of all, I just want to acknowledge the Noongar, Whadjuk and Ngalakala Budja people as the traditional owners on the land in which we are planning this project, and Whadjuk people as the owners on which the land in which we're meeting today. And we would also like to pay respect to the elders past, present and emerging. Noongar people the Whadjuk and the Ngalakala Budja people in this process are very important to us. We've established a Noongar advisory group consisting of elders and leaders elected by the Whadjuk Ngalakala Budja people in Kwinana to help guide us on this project, and that's a really important part of what we're trying to undertake. And part of what we're trying to do here is to respect cultural values and cultural interests, but also provide opportunity for Aboriginal people in this area as part of the development project when it gets started. Westport's goals. So I guess as we've some of you may have some background on Westport. But it is effectively the transition of the container supply chain and terminal from Fremantle's inner harbour down to Kwinana. It's a very large project, obviously. We only have one container terminal in Western Australia. You generally only have one in each state. It's central to our economy, and the drivers for this are really recognising that as we grow and increase into the throughput into the future, and as more and more people live in and around Fremantle, is that there's extreme amounts of congestion going to grow around getting containers in and out of Fremantle Port, which will make the supply chain more expensive for everyone and obviously affect ultimately the goods that we all purchase as purchase in our houses. We're at in terms of this project, we're at the stage 3 of the Westport project. Some of you may have been following the project for some time. There was a first stage between 2017 and 2021, which looked at the 28 different options and 8 different locations you could possibly put the container terminal. And after considering all the environmental, social, economic and engineering factors in those options, it was identified that the best place to build a terminal on balance was a land-backed container port at the end of Anketel Road. What we're in the process of doing now is really focusing in on that project. It's called a stage 3 business case, and really trying to understand exactly what would it take to build that project and exactly the benefits to the economy and the community that would come from it, but also the costs that will be involved in actually constructing it, both in terms of the financial costs, but also understanding the impacts on communities, impacts on environment and so on. To identify how this project should be developed and when it should be developed. Our plan is to have this business case completed in 2024 and presented to government when we've considered all those factors and are able to advise them on how and when this project should be built. The overall goals for Westport, obviously it's not, something of this scale and this size and this importance. It can't just be about making it cheaper to trade things in and out of Western Australia, although that is very, very important to our whole economy, given 90% of what's in our houses arrives in Western Australia through a container. It's also important that we do this in a way that can facilitate economic growth for the state for the next century. The last thing we want to do is to build a terminal and a supply chain in terms of roads and rail networks that gets congested again in 20 years, just like Leach Highway is now, and soon will be. It needs to be able to scale with the growth of Western Australia for the next century. We need to do this in a way that's fiscally responsible, so we need to not make it too expensive, because obviously that has an impact on the state's finances. We need to take care of that. This needs to be the most sustainable port in Australia. It's very rare that you get to develop something from scratch in terms of ports development, most of them expanding very, very old ports. So the opportunity to make this a net zero, carbon neutral port, the opportunity to do this to look at regenerating aspects of Cockburn Sound's environment as part of the big development project, even though we will have an impact for a short time during dredging, things we're looking at. And the opportunity, obviously, to look at using recycled materials in the supply chain and others are really important. It needs to benefit local communities and Indigenous people. So obviously there'll be a lot more jobs and a lot more economic activity down in Kwinana when a port such as this scale moves. And obviously around that as well, there'll be a lot of secondary industries and other things that'll start up, creating more jobs and activity in this area, which is fantastic for the local community. But also we sort of need to recognise, and I think importantly for this presentation, that it's not all just about the environment, that actually we need to understand how people use Cockburn Sound and how people use the environment that this port's operating in, and how we can make sure that those uses and values that people hold are protected and enhanced where possible, or we take into account and minimise the impact where we possibly can as part of the development. And finally, it needs to be safe for workers in the community. Obviously, there'll be a lot of trucks coming in and out, so that needs to be safe, and a lot of ships, and we need to make sure it's safe for everyone in terms of how they're using Cockburn Sound and the road and rail network. This is a sort of complicated diagram. I don't want to go through in any great detail. This is our sort of high-level roadmap, which sits above about 4,000 rows of actual detailed project plan. But what I wanted to just use is to explain to everyone is the type of works that we're undertaking in this project. So first of all, across the top, there's a really key focus at the moment on an ESG, which is Environment, Social and Governance Strategy, to make sure this is environmentally robust and sustainable, and obviously Noongar opportunities. In terms of what's in the green work stream, that's the environment and social work stream. So some of you, and Matt will talk about this more, there's a $13.5 million marine science program to make sure that we have all the information we need to be able to tailor our development project to minimise the impact on the environment, but also to identify ways to enhance it, regress, seagrass, whatever that might be, and make sure we've got the scientific basis so we can do that properly and efficiently and get the best outcome for the money spent. Underneath the environment program, that'll help us also understand how we need to undertake some of the heavy activities like dredging in the least impactful way, and prepare us to put a submission into the EPA when this project becomes regulated after consideration of the business case. But all the purple rows, that's really our engineering and design works. So that's where we're looking at things such as breakwater. This is where we're understanding how the roads and rail systems need to be connected. This is how we're thinking about how we're going to manage this project when it comes into an existing industrial area, and how we work with the companies and the infrastructure owners that are affected by all this new infrastructure. And obviously the key design around channels, the terminal, the logistics lands and everything. This would be our engineering and design project. The blue bars, really this is around the economics and the commercial. So this isn't like a rail line or a road, which is generally public infrastructure. The state buys and gets on with it. Obviously ports themselves, terminals are often run by the private sector. Container parks and intermodal terminals are run by the private sector. So what we need to do is to make sure that we build this in a way that it means that goods are going to be cheaper than they otherwise would be over the next century, and that the whole supply chain is robust, that everyone can make enough money out of it to make sure that we've got a reliable and efficient supply chain. And right down the bottom, that's part of our enabling project. We're buying the land that was required for the roads and rail to make sure that when this is ready to be built, it can be, and we can get on with it. People may have seen this map from, or something similar to this, I should say, as part of the stage 2 process. The stage 2 process, which was the optioning exercise, looking at 28 different options that finished in 2021. What this gives you a sense of is where the terminal is going to be. So, and the scale of it. So anyone who's familiar with the area will understand that is a very large rectangle of concrete that's attached to the land there. And that's around about the scale that's required to deal with the size of ships that's going to be coming in the future and the amount of containers that'll be coming off them. It also shows you potentially the size in that sort of slightly shaded area of the road and rail corridor that needs to be connected to the port to make sure those containers can get off and off to the shops that we all need them to be at and fast enough. The final terminal may not look exactly like this. As I said, the stage 2 work, the optioning work was done really sort of to look at the best place for the terminal. But what we're having to do now is the work around how the terminal needs to be configured. Does it, and what angle it needs to be on? Does it need to look something quite different from this to make sure that things like waves and storms don't affect ships when they're trying to unload the containers? And also at the same time to minimise impact on the environment and to minimise the amount of dredging we need to do. So the part of the work that we'll be doing over the next 18 months to 2 years may change that shape considerably, but I think the reality is that it's going to be in this location. This is the best place for the port for a number of reasons. We've looked at island ports, we've looked at ports further north and off the end of Rowley Road, and all of those have much greater impact on the environment, even though they might be actually better in terms of performance for unloading containers. And so this was the best option that we arrived at. So obviously people do use this beach, and this is a larger stretch of beach which is impacted, and there will be impacts on those locations. And unfortunately, that's part of actually just needing to find a new location for a terminal. I'm going to sort of finish after this slide. All I wanted to say as well is that Westport obviously is a very large project. There's been a lot of consideration about what Westport is and what effect it might have on the sound, whether that is on snapper, on the environment, on the water quality. I guess one of the things I'd like to assure you, and hopefully Matt will build some confidence here, is that we are really, you know, expending every effort we possibly can to make sure we do this in an environmentally sensitive way. Even our design contracts that we're releasing are being done in a way where we're requiring our engineers not just to be engineers, but also to bring on ecologists to those teams to think about, if we need something like a breakwater, how can we turn that breakwater into habitat, or how can we use dredge spoil to create sort of you know, cobble reefs or something which will attract fish and help seagrass regrow. So we're spending a lot of time on that. But the other thing to note, I think, is that Westport is one project. It is a big one, but the Cockburn Sound is much bigger than just Westport, and the need to manage Cockburn Sound for all of the different pressures on it. For example, Westport, some of you may have seen the announcement around the large vessel dry dock up at AMC. There's been the conversation around Woodside. So really what we've done is we've triggered a sort of a whole of government approach to trying to manage Cockburn Sound, where all of those agencies are contributing to a process where we think about all of those developments and how we can manage them over time to make sure that the social values and the things that you guys enjoy about the sound, as well as the environment, is protected at the end of it. So I'm going to finish there and hand over to Matt for the next stage of the presentation, but then we can come back and ask any questions.
Thank you. Yeah, my name's Matt Buckles. I'm the Westport Environment and Social Program Delivery Manager. I've been on board at Westport since early 2018. And so I'm just going to run through marine environment program and some of the social things that we're looking at. So the future terminal, there's a map on the right-hand side there, which again is sort of a bit of a broader image, shows where the terminal sits at the end of an extended Anchortail Road. It sits to the south of the Alcoa Jetty, north of the operating bulk terminal that Fremantle Ports operates. It's about 7 kilometres from the Woodman Point boat ramps, which is obviously a gateway to the sound for many recreational users of Cockburn Sound. We are proposing a new channel through the Parmelia and Success Banks. So that's located about 4 kilometres from the Woodman Point boat ramps to get down from Fremantle into the port. So that is slightly to the east of the existing shipping channel that the CBH and Alcoa ships would use at the moment. The volumes, it's interesting to know from a social perspective, is that there are currently 250 container ships go into Fremantle Inner Harbour. Those would obviously at some stage transition to Kwinana, and then there would be growth beyond those shipping containers as the container trade grows. But it's worth noting that there are already 800 ships a year that deal with that approach other jetties in Cockburn Sound already. So the Fremantle Ports bulk terminals and bulk jetty, the CBH jetty, Alcoa and BP. So there is a significant amount of shipping already, but that is not to say that we're not adding to it, but it's just to give some context to it. Also on the map there, it just shows some of the things that we did manage to avoid in the site selection, where we are to the south of it says there we're to the south of the Naval Base Horse Beach, but we're not. We're on top of the Naval Base Horse Beach, so that's an error in that diagram, sorry. We are to the south of the Naval Base Shacks, which was a big consideration and concern at the time of our multi-criteria assessment, and we're to the south of Challenger Beach, and we are as far away as you could possibly be from the Woodman Point boat ramps in terms of vessel management. But I think it's important to acknowledge that this is being built on top of what is a relatively underused, but by the people who use it, it is an important beach. So it is used by the horse fraternity for exercising horses. It's quite an open expanse of beach, and it is used for, you know, people go to visit on picnics and the like, and they do a bit of fishing down there as well. And so we're aware of these things, and we are seeking to manage them. The environment and social program more broadly has got a big focus on marine environmental issues. Obviously, we're building a large piece of infrastructure in Cockburn Sound, and Cockburn Sound is a recreationally and environmentally important area in WA. It is a sheltered water, and that's also what makes it a popular location for industrial development and shipping, the relatively benign waters of Cockburn Sound. There's a big focus on terrestrial environment while we're putting a port in Cockburn Sound. We're not forgetting the rest of the freight link will link all the way from Angertell Road, Thomas Road through to Tonkin Highway. There'll be upgrades to rail infrastructure, and there will be intermodal terminals and empty container parks dotted across Perth as is deemed appropriate through the research the other sections of the Westport program are looking at. And we have a lot of focus on the social aspects and values, predominantly of the environmental issues. So trying to find out, what really matters to people, not just really what matters to environmental, like the environmental regulator. So there are things that the social the community may value more than, say, the Environmental Protection Authority may value, and we're not trying to forget those as well. And also how people value those things, which will assist us in decisions around port design, so that we understand what we are impinging on and what are things that actually don't appear to be of high value. Some of our key outcomes are, obviously, we have to prepare for an environmental impact assessment process, and we have a lot of regulatory things that we have to address there, and that regulation does include social issues. The EP Act does include sort of social values, not just environmental values. And another key outcome is we were building a mitigation strategy for a regenerative port. The aim is to leave Cockburn Sound in a better condition than when this port commences. I don't have a slide on this, but obviously over the years, in 1950s and 60s through the 70s, there was a lot of unmanaged industrial development in Cockburn Sound, and that led to issues around significant loss of seagrass and impact on other species. Over the years, since the Cockburn Sound Management Council has sort of been trying to address an awful lot of these environmental issues, there's been a big effort in cleaning up Cockburn Sound. The water quality has improved significantly, but things like seagrass are not growing back at the rate that people may have hoped, and there's been a significant loss of seagrass, and so we'll be making sure that we are trying to do what we can to bring seagrass back and provide for all the other important species in Cockburn Sound. But seagrass is sort of like the backbone of Cockburn Sound. Everything depends on this ecosystem to support other life forms. Through the delivery, we have a significant WAMSI Westport Marine Science program that Patrick alluded to earlier that I'll go into some more detail. And then we have the broader non-WAMSI environmental and social workstream that looks at other environmental programs and also social values and social mitigations. So I'm going to give a quick overview of the WAMSI Westport Science Plan. It is a 9-theme program that targets the things that have been identified as really mattering from an environmental and a social perspective in Cockburn Sound through the previous stages of Westport. We have a significant theme on ecosystem modeling, which will give us great tools to be able to really understand what the impact of this port is across the system and how small changes in one area of the system may result in changes in the other area of the system, and also as the basis for cumulative impact assessment. So we're not just considering Westport's impact, but we're considering the impacts of pretty much any other known development in Cockburn Sound, so that when we say this will be environmentally acceptable, it's with the full knowledge of other developments in Cockburn Sound. Theme 2 is a theme in the program, benthic communities and habitats. Benthic communities being the things that live on the seafloor, the benthos of Cockburn Sound. A significant focus on seagrass, understanding seagrass and trying to figure out how seagrass can be restored appropriately. This does come with a focus on increases to seeding of seagrass, and there's a successful Ozfish/Recfish West program called Seeds for Snapper, which is in place at the moment, and we are endeavouring to improve on that. And I know Recfish West are online at the moment, and we're working with Recfish West directly at the moment to make sure that we are meeting the expectations of the community on improving that particular system. But you know, it'll be for all the research that's happening in Cockburn Sound, it would be true to know that people don't really know fully why seagrass is not growing back now the water quality is improved. So we're doing a lot of work into what could be done at the seabed. Are there constraints after 30 years of nothing being alive on Cockburn Shelf and Kwinana Shelf? Are there fundamental issues there now that mean that seagrass can't grow back? We have a big theme in sediment and water quality. We need to understand what's in the sediment after years of industrial development, and we need to understand what the water quality impacts of the port will be, what the current water quality is, and what the impacts could potentially be through our dredging program. Really understand it, giving a good baseline so you can do impact assessment against. We have a theme, fisheries and aquatic resources, that is really looking at key species significantly being run through DPED and WAMSI. Lots of work into snapper, lots of work into the forage fish that support things like snapper, and a number of other things looking into the right down to the phytoplankton and the like. So the whole food web of fisheries and aquatic resources. We have a theme 5, which is hydrodynamic modelling. One of the important things in Cockburn Sound is knowing that what you do doesn't change the way the water moves around Cockburn Sound. The circulation system in this sheltered embayment is very important, and you don't want to be introducing increased stagnation of the water where the circulation is impeded, and you end up with issues like you'd sometimes see down towards, which was a big issue in the Mangles Bay development that was recently being considered, in terms of, you know, there are areas where there are seasonal lower water quality conditions that can lead to deoxygenation conditions, which can lead to fish kills and the like. Theme 6, social values, and I'm going to spend a little bit longer on this one, is really because this is the purpose of this particular webinar. Is the theme of this one is to identify and understand the community values connected to Cockburn Sound, so that we know where to invest mitigations and we know what to prioritize in trying to avoid impacts. I'll go into the sub-projects of this one, which there are 3 sub-projects in theme 6. Project 6.1 is on environmental values. This is essentially a survey that will be undertaken by the researchers at UWA to a randomly selected sample of local and across Perth community members to find out what the broad population considers about Cockburn Sound and how it prioritises, in a broader issue, environmental values and what types of environmentals, how they value marine fauna, flora in natural habitats, and also which of those they would value more or less. Not that we're obviously intending to get rid of any, but mostly when we're looking at regeneration and of Cockburn Sound, is what are the priority projects that people really see are important. And again, you know, whilst to the regulator seagrass is very, very important, there probably aren't many people who you know, kids don't go home and draw pictures of seagrass on their fridge. They draw seahorses, they draw dolphins, and people really associate with those sort of iconic species. So what are those things that really matter? And I say this is an independent survey of randomly selected people within the metro area, which is really important for that particular project. We then have Project 6.2, which is a project specifically looking into recreational fishing values. It has focus groups, it has surveys directly of identified recreational fishing members to identify the things that matter to them and the things that they would be seeking to replace when impacts happen, and what sort of impacts are less or more important to them. I'll just touch on, you know, we did do some work in stage 2, which looked at environmental and community values, and it sort of got a little bit it didn't possibly provide the results that we were really looking for. And so this one is one of the learnings of that, is to really make sure that we have a specific 6.1, which is the broader community survey, and a 6.2 that really digs deep into recreational fishing values, because recreational fishing is sort of seen as the one of the critical social issues that takes place in Cockburn Sound. It is a very popular fishing destination, but it is also popular for many other things, which then moves us into 6.3, which is again a lot of statistically, scientifically robust research that identifies and maps other important recreational activities in Cockburn Sound. There'll be an online survey undertaken through this, which anyone will be invited and you'll be able to share to people. It won't be a randomly selected, but we want to know what everybody thinks, and the researchers will collate this and let us make sure that the 6.1 is collating with 6.2 and 6.3, so we've not missed other recreational values that are very important. Obviously, there's diving that takes place in Cockburn Sound. There are 2 horse beaches in Cockburn Sound. We're building on top of one of them. We want to understand what's wrong with the other one and if things can be done to improve that. There are tourism activities in Cockburn Sound. There's leisure boating in Cockburn Sound. There's long distance yacht races take place in Cockburn Sound. There's a lot of other recreational values. I'll move on to theme 7. We're trying to understand the underground noise soundscape of Cockburn Sound, so that people so that we understand what the impact of more shipping and more construction will be on important species in Cockburn Sound. Theme 8 is a lot of research into the apex predators and iconic species. These are things like your Australian sea lion, your dolphins, your snapper, a lot of other things that are going on into these sort of very important species in Cockburn Sound. And theme 9 is coastal processes. People are aware of sort of up and down the Perth coast of issues of loss of beachfront in storm events that seem to be increasing, linked with climate change and increasing sea levels. But even if, depending on your thoughts on that, it's still very important. There's no doubt that there are areas where the beaches are under threat, and we're trying to make sure that we understand fully the coastal processes in place in Cockburn Sound and what a port construction will do to impede that, and ways to manage that coastal processes and erosion issue. Look, the next slide is it's a bit of a boring slide in terms of what our environmental impact assessment approach is. We have a timeline to it. At the moment, obviously, government hasn't determined to accept our business case and move on with construction, but we are preparing for, well, we're not just sitting here twiddling our thumbs, we're preparing for a future impact assessment. The important thing in this slide really is to see that within the stage of the EIA, there is a public review and advertising period, and we would expect this project to be thoroughly scrutinized by the EPA and be publicly advertised for the statutory period, which give people a real opportunity to put in submissions if they feel they've been missed in other areas. So, you will have opportunities to contribute at that tail end as well as now in the process. The timeline there says outcome announcement Q1 2026. Just want to note that obviously government hasn't decided to proceed with the project, and this will all be dependent on some timeline set by government in the future when they determine that they will or will not accept our business case. We do have upcoming engagement opportunities that people will be able to keep track of and register for. We have got 6.2, which is the recreational fishing values, which I discussed. They will be active in the recreational fishing community November 22 to March 23 over the summer period, and probably a bit before and a bit after that with follow-up work, and possibly the next summer as well, which is really making sure that we are engaging well with recreational fishing at a time when people are active in Cockburn Sound or not active, depending on the snapper closures or the demersal fishing closures, sorry. And so that work will be taking place, and people will be advertised, and groups on here are interested in recreational fishing will be contacted to make sure that they are involved in that. 6.3 other recreational values. Again, that's on a similar time frame. There's a lot of focus towards the end of this year, and that team is gearing up now with their surveys and approaches, and again are seeking to engage with community groups and recreational users to make sure that they're asking the questions that matter and that they're engaging with the right people. And we also, Westport has direct engagement with community and user groups. It says TBA because we do not have a strict program of that, but Westport will be outside of the WAMSI program, be working with the community to ensure that we have we've engaged appropriately and understand what people's priorities are. We have some specific work that is being undertaken in this. We have a mitigation working groups that are sort of technical experts who will help us determine what we should be doing in the terrestrial and marine space to mitigate our offsets, to build resilience in Cockburn Sound and build a regenerative port development in Cockburn Sound. And those mitigations groups will include representatives from community groups as identified by Westport. This is an opportunity specific. Obviously, we have a Noongar advisory group that is working solidly in the Noongar space, and obviously you can't put your hand up and want to be on the Noongar advisory group, I'm afraid, but they may well have points at which they interact with the broader community, so people are fully understanding what we are doing in the Noongar space, because I think it's something that we can be really proud of. And we also have a local government reference group that engages directly with the relevant local governments up and down Cockburn Sound and across the entire length of the supply chain. So they are, depending on where, I know we've got some local government representatives online today that they should, if they are not aware of that, they should look out for that. And I believe I've come to the end of the presentation. So we are now into the Q&A session. Pass over to Patrick, who will have a gaze at some questions.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Matt. So look, yeah, obviously there's a fair bit to take in there, and there's a lot more to this project. As you can imagine, something this scale and with this many facets is very complicated. So there's I guess this is the beginning of an engagement, and I guess the door's always opened. I think there's a link in the last slide, or we circulated to people here that if they do want any more information, they can reach out and ask for it. But we'll just take the opportunity to answer some questions which have been raised. So I've got 3 questions or statements which have been noted in the chat. And just to remind anyone that if you do have anything that you'd like to know a bit more about, please type it in now and we'll do our best to answer it as much as we can immediately, or we'll get back to you if we need to take it away. So first of all, Leyland has asked whether the design and logistics component. So I guess this is our, when we go back to the roadmap that we showed you, that the engineering bit doesn't look like they'll be informed much by the science plan. I'm sure there's overlap, but the last slide didn't show it. Yeah. So as I said, there's about 3,500-4,000 rows of detailed project planning behind those big bars that you see in that chart. So the science plan, obviously there's a lot of, there's 30 different science projects, I think. Yes. And each of those science projects is broken up into stages, but it's not like there's 30 science projects start on day 1 and then continue on for 3 years and then finish. They work in stages, and the way that we've staged that program is to actually provide as much information as we possibly can get at the key points of engineering design where we need to. But that being said, so for example, the hydrodynamic modelling, for example, which we're dealing with outside of WAMSI, we're funding that separately through a consultant because it's a more applied science rather than a research project. We're going to try and do that as soon as possible because that will help us understand how we need to design the terminal around the coast to make sure we don't end up with any of those water quality issues, or even potentially to look at, is there opportunities to build part of the port on pylons, for example, to allow some throughput of water along the coast or something like that. I'm not sort of saying that's engineering possible. It's the sort of thing we'd like to look at if we see some of these impacts. So that would be done earlier, and that would help us with certain components of the design. A lot of the other components of the science program, a lot of it is focused heavily on helping us design our dredging program. So ultimately, the size of the channels and the orientation of the channels is largely going to be driven as, we position the port in a place with the least environmental impact already. So that work was done last time. We've put it in a place where the seagrass hasn't existed now for about 20 years. It hasn't recovered. And so the channels are largely going to be designed through the requirements of safe shipping, and obviously the sharing of shipping with other users of the sound. However, the way you dredge in what equipment you use to dredge, and do you dredge all at once or do you break it up into several small programs? That's the thing that's going to really make the difference in terms of the environmental impact of this project. It only happened for a short period, but that's a very substantial impact compared to the long-term term operations. So a lot, while the science is dropping into the engineering throughout the program, a lot of that is also focused on, well, this is the channel we need, but we've got a bit more time to figure out the optimal dredging program that we need to roll out before we go to the EPA and say, and to the public through a public environmental review, this is the way we think we can dredge, while keep, in the long term, keep everything in the sound. So yeah, there is a connection, Leyland, and yeah, that slide doesn't show it because it's sort of quite extensively hidden back. Jane's has commented on never underused. Some days we have several hundred horse owners there and have been for decades. This beach is unique in WA and has international attention due to its value. Jane, I know you're just leaving, so I've said that we might reach out to you with a bit of an, just an email back to that effect. But yeah, look, I think we're very aware that there is, unfortunately, with these projects, it's impossible to do a project like this without having an impact on certain businesses, certain homeowners, and certain users of infrastructure. I mean, we've had conversations with homeowners along Anketel Road who are going to be affected by the widening of that road. It's really unfortunate that we have to do that, but what we've tried to do is to minimise the impact on as many people and interests as possible. But there's no way you can do this without putting it somewhere in the pristine Kimberley or something like that, which will obviously never work, but without actually having an effect on people and the uses of land. So it is unfortunate that there will be an impact on that horse beach. And I don't know whether actually the planned second desal plant and the pipelines of that would have affected. But I think that's Water Corporation owned beach anyway, isn't it?
It is correct. Our understanding is that it is beach that is only publicly accessible because Water Corp allows people to access it, and they sort of have the ability to, and they have previously closed it, fenced it off, and then took the fence down. So, and I think that I just wanted to say, Patrick, well, I did say it was a less utilised beach. One thing we've always recognised with this beach is that whilst it is not used by a significant proportion of the broader community, the people who do use it have very specific reasons for using that beach, and they certainly have uses and values that we do recognise, and we will look to mitigate. That was all I want to say there. So I didn't mean to say that it wasn't used, but it's just used less than others, but it is still a very important beach.
Yeah. So there are uses, and I think this is why we want to have those engagements with people and get to the mitigation planning program and consult with people like yourselves, but we're developing that mitigation program, is to sort of say, well, if we can't avoid impact X, what can we try and do to make sure that the community is maybe not better off if we can't achieve that, but at least we do something so that there's that the users of the place have some benefit. Sorry, I've skipped a few on. Leyland, will the outputs from the science plan projects be publicly available? Yes. As this presentation is being recorded, will a link be made available so it can be shared to those who couldn't make it today? I think so. I'll have to ask my comms people about that, but I think that's okay. We'll see. Jane, as I said, Jane's leaving to catch a flight. Happy flight. Leyland Campbell's asked, when is the science plan going to release? We're just dealing with some of the comments from Wreckfish West, Leyland, and then we will release the plan. Vanessa has identified, hello, I'm currently managing coastal sites along sections of the Kwinana Industrial Coastal Strip. It's evident there will be huge coastal changes with this port. What budget allocations are there to help restore and maintain the coastline long term to prevent erosion and impacts to the coastal environment? Whose responsibility does this become? WAMSI, LGA, industries. Thank you. So normally what would happen is you go through the process, the EPA would consider coastal effects and they would set conditions, and then part of those conditions might be offsets or otherwise. We've gone to government and got pre-approval for $53 million towards environmental mitigation and offset work. So we'll be using that to to identify things that can be done beforehand. For example, in terms of if we're going to have impacts on vegetation, can we grow double that amount of vegetation somewhere else, or whatever else it might be? And the same thing might apply to the coastal environment as well. We might look at sort of likely impacts that are going to come up and sort of say, well, how can we invest in other local coastal environments to sort of help enhance those even before the port operates? And I think this is part of the mitigation planning program that we need to get to. Yeah. Similarly, with the marine space, we may invest in, we're doing trials at the moment in terms of scientific trials to sort of look at like a big step up in sort of seagrass seeding to sort of make sure that seagrass regrowing can work at scale. And if that's proven before the port happens, there may be a desire of government, even if they haven't made a decision to progress with the port at that stage, to invest in some of these processes anyway. And so we'll take it through the process.
Patrick, would you mind if I just added that when we in Westport stages 1 and 2, obviously, coastal changes was something that was considered in the site selection of the port, and we did have a couple of workshops with leading coastal processes experts who came and sat down looking at the issue of the location of the ports and coastal processes, and I guess this particular location was considered relatively low risk from a coastal processes point of view, and they gave good advice on things that could be considered for mitigations. And now with the WAMSI science program, we have, or essentially the state's best academic coastal processes people working on exactly these questions to make sure that this port is not going to be left in a situation where suddenly you find Challenger Beach has no sand after a few years because the circulation has been got rid of. So we are putting a lot of focus into those coastal process issues.
Yeah, and as to who would manage it, it certainly wouldn't be WAMSI. WAMSI is a science broker and a science collaboration that we're utilising. We're utilising WAMSI, getting back to the previous question about are we going to release this information to science. One of the things we thought is that the community is going to have more trust in the process if we go to an independent science organisation like that, which has basically in their DNA that they release data and release science. So that's one of the reasons we've chose that, is that there's an independent arm doing that science rather than us just hiring consultants, if you like, and having that information to ourselves. But they are a science organisation, so they certainly would be involved in the management of coastal erosion. It would likely be either local governments or the Port Authority, or I suspect not in an industry consortium, but those things need to be sorted out. Part of our job is to figure out the governance of how this port will operate and work, both in terms of the environment side of things as it goes forwards. Confirming John and Stephen joined from commencement of the meeting. Hopefully it was useful, John and Stephen.
I assume that's because they've attended as a functions group, so who their members were. Great.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we've got to the end of the questions, but I will wait for a couple more minutes, or a couple of minutes, to just see if anyone else has anything burning they'd like to ask at this stage.
I just note, Vanessa, your comments about managing coastal processes. If you want to reach out to Westport, and we can have direct conversations with you. I'm not sure who you work for or who you're, whether it's a local government or whether it's an industry-backed thing, but certainly it would be great to have a conversation with you about that.
All right. Look, I think everyone's asked the questions that they've got. We'll continue to try and update people as we go through the process, of course. We are still at the beginning of this project in a way, because of some delays because of COVID and so on. So there's a lot more to see here, and I guess as the science projects start to roll out information, that'll be really that information will become available, and we'll be able to share that with you. And obviously, as Matt pointed out, there's a bunch of opportunities, or really sort of we'd really appreciate the opportunity to come for either ourselves or for the WAMSI researchers to be able to come and talk to you to make sure we understand the things that you care about, and so we can actually best deal with them as we go. Leyland sort of commented on remains a general perception the port is a foregone conclusion. This is something that needs to be kept in mind going forwards. Yeah, look, as Matt's pointed out, we are developing a business case. However, and as I said, the how and the when is a really key fundamental question around that business case. I think what we need to be considerate of, however, is that there was fairly extensive consideration of all the different options where a port could actually be put in the future. And there is a very real time as to where Fremantle's inner harbour is just going to be constrained because the ships are going to become too big and the congestion around the terminal will become too much. And that's not congestion because of the port, it's congestion because of all the people that live around the port to get things in and out. So at some point there will need to be an alternative way of getting trade in and out of Western Australia, and this is the best point. So yeah, Leyland is there's a foregone conclusion. This is not a foregone conclusion, but at some point it's likely that this will be the location for a port at some location at some time in the future. And I think we've got to remind that this is actually the third time people have suggested putting a container port in Kwinana as the opportunity. So it seems to be coalescing around this location. Quick question from Matt. So Matt, you mentioned 800 ships currently. Do you know what amount going forwards?
Look, I'm the Environment Program Coordinator, so we could get that answer to you, but essentially there's 800 ships to Cockburn Sound at the moment from all of the bulk facilities that happen down there. There are 250 approximately container ships that go to the inner harbour at the moment. So if you were to extrapolate that as a ship per container through to the future, well, the 250 container ships could become 500, 750 container ships, but there are a whole lot of and that's going out 70 years. There's a whole lot of variability around how big the ships are, how frequently that they visit. So there's not a direct correlation between the container volume and the number of ships, but it would be sort of, it would be, it's hard for me to tell, so I'd have to give a direct answer, but it would be lower than the 800 that are there now for decades.
So I think one of the things to recognise here is, first of all, one of the reasons we are doing this is because the ships are getting bigger. And so what you generally see is that, the amount of ships is increasing, smaller ships is increasing. And then as soon as the bigger ships start coming, you see a reduction in the number of ships which are actually coming, because you've got, if you imagine you've got containers coming in on 6,000, 7,000 TEU ships, and suddenly they go to 14,000 container ships, you can carry the same amount of 2 ships on one. So you can get a decrease, but it slowly increases. So there is that factor.
Yeah. There's also a factor where at the moment when the larger ships that come to Fremantle don't actually deliver as many containers as the smaller ships. The smaller ships that shuttle direct from Singapore or others, they have a high turnover of containers, whereas the larger ships that are coming across, maybe especially as things grow, they're doing like an Asian circuit that then comes around Australia, goes to New Zealand and out again. They're larger ships, but that's because they're servicing far more ports and actually don't have quite. So it's a funny thing where they take up more space on your berth for longer, but don't exchange as many containers. So it is actually quite a complex equation, that balance. Yeah.
And I think obviously there's a whole bunch of other users in the Sound. So we were talking with CBH. CBH has had just continually amazing years in terms of wheat exports. And so during the harvest season, you'll probably start to see an increase in the amount of grain ships going out. So there's a lot going on in the Cockburn Sound in that space. Any news on live export sheep movement ships? That's a different part of government. I'll have to leave that for the elected officials to comment on. That's not really part of what we're looking at. I would say one of the things we are looking at in terms of Westport is just doing some preliminary work on where the other trades in the inner harbour currently go to Fremantle, what the future of those might be. As you know, the government has an aspiration for the future of Fremantle once the containers leave, and part of that's thinking about, well, where should the scrap metal, where should the cars go, where should the livestock ships go as well. So there's a fair bit of moving parts in this space at the moment, but fundamentally Westport is largely focused on the container terminal that's going to go into Kwinana at the end of Anketel Road. All right. I think if that's it, as I said, I think either in the email or otherwise it's been circulated, there will be a contact address that people can get in touch with for further information or if they want to reach out. But apart from that, thanks very much for spending the time this afternoon talking to us, and we will see you soon. Thanks very much.